The year 1816 marked a pivotal moment in English aristocratic society, where the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars had reshaped not only the political landscape but also the delicate social fabric that governed the lives of the nobility. In the sprawling countryside of Derbyshire, the magnificent Thornfield Manor stood as a testament to centuries of aristocratic power, its Georgian architecture reflecting the refined elegance that defined the upper echelons of society. Within the marble halls of this ancestral estate, Lady Catherine Pemberton, the 24-year-old Marquess of Thornfield, moved through her daily routines with the grace expected of her station, yet beneath her composed exterior lay a turbulent sea of anxiety and desperation. Married for 3 years to the distinguished Lord Edmund Pemberton, a man 15 years her senior, Catherine had thus far failed to fulfill what society considered her most sacred duty, producing an heir to continue the illustrious Pemberton lineage. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the breakfast room as Catherine delicately sipped her tea from a porcelain cup adorned with the family crest. Her lady-in-waiting, Miss Eleanor Hartwell, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s whose loyalty to the family had been unwavering for over a decade, observed her mistress with growing concern. The subtle changes in Catherine's demeanor had not escaped Eleanor's notice, the way her hands trembled slightly when handling correspondence, the distant look that would cloud her violet eyes during conversations about neighboring families and their children. Lord Edmund entered the breakfast room with the measured steps of a man accustomed to command, his dark hair meticulously groomed and his morning coat impeccably tailored. At 39, he possessed the distinguished bearing that had made him one of the most sought-after bachelors before his marriage to Catherine, yet the pressure of his position as Marquess weighed heavily upon his shoulders. The estate required careful management, particularly in these uncertain economic times, and the absence of an heir had become a source of increasing concern among the family trustees and the extended Pemberton relatives. "Good morning, my dear," Edmund said, his voice carrying the formal politeness that had characterized their relationship since the early months of their marriage. "I trust you slept well?" Catherine looked up from her correspondence, a collection of invitations to various social events that would require her presence in the coming weeks. "Quite well, thank you, Edmund. Lady Ashworth has invited us to her autumn ball next month. The entire county will be in attendance." The mention of social gatherings brought an almost imperceptible tension to Edmund's features. These events, while necessary for maintaining their social standing, also served as reminders of their childless state. Invariably, conversations would turn to the offspring of other noble families, the achievements of young lords and ladies, and the subtle but persistent inquiries about when the Pemberton family might expect similar joyous announcements. Eleanor cleared her throat delicately, a signal that she had something of importance to discuss. "My lady, if I may, there was a letter from your cousin Margaret yesterday. She writes that she is expecting her 4th child this winter." The words hung in the air like a physical presence, and Catherine felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Margaret, 2 years younger than Catherine, had married into a lesser noble family yet had achieved what Catherine had not. She had secured her husband's lineage and her own social position through the simple act of bearing children. Edmund folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, the rustle of paper serving as a momentary distraction from the weight of unspoken expectations. "That is indeed wonderful news for the Ashford family," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "They have been blessed with remarkable fertility." The subtext of his words was not lost on Catherine. In the intricate language of aristocratic discourse, compliments to others often carried implicit criticisms of one's own circumstances. She had become acutely aware of these subtle reproaches, these gentle reminders of her perceived failure to fulfill her marital obligations. As the breakfast concluded and Edmund departed for his morning inspection of the estate grounds, Catherine found herself alone with Eleanor, who had served not only as her lady-in-waiting but also as her confidant during the most challenging moments of her marriage. The older woman's experience and wisdom had been invaluable in navigating the complex social expectations that governed aristocratic life. "Eleanor," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I cannot continue to endure these constant reminders of my inadequacy. Every social gathering, every family letter, every conversation seems designed to emphasize my failure to provide Edmund with an heir." Eleanor moved closer, her own voice lowered to ensure their conversation remained private. "My lady, you must not speak of yourself in such terms. The blessing of children comes in God's time, not according to society's schedule." But Catherine's mind had already begun to formulate a desperate plan, one born of the pressure that had been building for months. The autumn social season would bring numerous opportunities for public appearances, and with them, countless opportunities for judgment and speculation about her childless state. The whispers had already begun among the county families, subtle inquiries about her health, veiled suggestions about consulting physicians in London, and the increasingly bold observations about the Pemberton estate's future without a direct heir. "What if," Catherine said, her voice taking on a tone of dangerous determination, "what if I could silence those whispers? What if I could give Edmund and society exactly what they expect to hear?" Eleanor's eyes widened with alarm as she recognized the implication behind her mistress's words. "My lady, surely you cannot be contemplating what I fear you are suggesting." Catherine rose from her chair and moved to the window, gazing out at the meticulously maintained gardens where Edmund was speaking with the head groundskeeper. The autumn flowers still bloomed in carefully arranged beds, their beauty a testament to the order and control that governed every aspect of life at Thornfield Manor. Yet beneath this facade of perfection lay the growing desperation of a woman who felt her entire world slipping away due to circumstances beyond her control. "The Ashworth Ball presents the perfect opportunity," Catherine continued, her mind now fully committed to the dangerous path she was considering. A public announcement would carry significant weight, and the timing would allow for several months before any complications might arise. Eleanor stepped forward, her loyalty to Catherine warring with her moral sensibilities. "My lady, the consequences of such deception could be catastrophic. The discovery of such a lie would bring scandal not only upon yourself but upon the entire Pemberton family. Your husband's reputation, your own standing in society, the very foundation of your marriage, all would be at risk." But Catherine had moved beyond considerations of risk and consequence. The pressure of expectation, the weight of judgment, and the constant reminder of her perceived failure had combined to create a desperation that overwhelmed rational thought. In her mind, the temporary relief that such an announcement would provide seemed worth any future complications that might arise. "I have considered the risks," she said, turning back to face Eleanor with an expression of resolve that brooked no argument. "But I can no longer bear the shame of disappointing everyone who depends upon me. If I cannot provide the reality they desire, then I shall provide them with the illusion until reality can be arranged." The morning sun continued to stream through the windows of Thornfield Manor, illuminating a scene of domestic tranquility that masked the brewing storm of deception and desperation. Catherine's decision would set in motion a series of events that would test not only her own courage and resourcefulness but also the very foundations of the aristocratic society that had driven her to such desperate measures. As Eleanor struggled to find words that might dissuade her mistress from this perilous course, the sound of approaching carriages announced the arrival of the day's first visitors. The routine of social obligations would continue, each interaction adding another layer of pressure to the already unbearable weight of expectation that had driven Catherine to contemplate the unthinkable. The stage was set for a deception that would challenge every assumption about duty, honor, and the price of meeting society's relentless demands. 3 weeks had passed since Catherine's fateful decision, and the autumn social season was reaching its peak with Lady Ashworth's Grand Ball, an event that drew the finest families from across the county and beyond. The Ashworth estate, renowned for its opulent entertainments, had been transformed into a glittering showcase of aristocratic splendor, with hundreds of candles illuminating the ballroom's crystal chandeliers and the finest musicians providing elegant waltzes for the assembled guests. Catherine stood before her dressing mirror in the guest chambers that the Ashworths had graciously provided for their most distinguished visitors. Her reflection revealed a woman who had spent considerable time preparing for this crucial evening. Her auburn hair had been arranged in an elaborate style adorned with pearls that had belonged to Edmund's grandmother, and her gown, a creation of deep emerald silk that complemented her eyes, had been selected specifically for its ability to project an image of refined elegance and subtle authority. Eleanor moved about the chamber with practiced efficiency, making final adjustments to Catherine's appearance while her own anxiety remained carefully concealed beneath years of professional training. The conversations they had shared over the past weeks had done nothing to dissuade Catherine from her chosen course, and Eleanor had reluctantly agreed to provide whatever assistance might be required, her loyalty to her mistress overriding her moral reservations about the deception. "The placement of your jewelry draws attention to your décolletage in a most flattering manner, my lady," Eleanor observed, fastening a necklace of sapphires that had been a wedding gift from Edmund's family. "You appear radiant this evening, which shall certainly support the announcement you intend to make." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her gown, a nervous gesture that betrayed the magnitude of what she was preparing to do. The plan she had formulated required precise timing and careful orchestration. The announcement would need to be made in a manner that appeared spontaneous yet ensured maximum impact among the assembled guests. "I have identified the optimal moment," Catherine said, her voice carrying a forced confidence that barely masked her underlying terror. Lady Ashworth traditionally calls for attention during the third set of dances to acknowledge special guests and significant announcements. The timing will allow the news to spread throughout the gathering while appearing entirely natural and unpremeditated. The sound of carriages arriving in the courtyard below provided a constant reminder of the scale of the evening's entertainment. Through the chamber windows, Catherine could observe the parade of elegantly dressed ladies and distinguished gentlemen making their way toward the manor's grand entrance, each arrival adding to the pressure she felt regarding her intended performance. Edmund appeared at the chamber door, resplendent in his formal evening wear, a black tailcoat with silver buttons bearing the family crest, pristine white gloves, and the decorative orders that marked his status and military service during the recent conflicts. His appearance commanded attention and respect, qualities that would lend additional weight to any announcement made by his wife during the evening's festivities. "Catherine, you look absolutely magnificent," he said, offering his arm with the courtly gesture that had characterized their relationship throughout their marriage. "Shall we join the festivities? I believe Lord Ashworth is particularly eager to discuss the recent developments in Parliament regarding the Corn Laws." As they descended the grand staircase toward the ballroom, Catherine felt the weight of expectation settling upon her shoulders like a physical burden. The elaborate decorations, the assembled guests, and the general atmosphere of celebration seemed to mock her internal turmoil, yet she maintained the composed exterior that aristocratic training had instilled in her from childhood. The ballroom presented a scene of unparalleled elegance, with ladies in gowns of every conceivable shade and gentlemen in formal attire creating a kaleidoscope of refined fashion and social distinction. The conversations that filled the air touched upon topics ranging from the latest London fashions to political developments, agricultural concerns, and the inevitable discussions of family matters that would soon become relevant to Catherine's own situation. Lady Ashworth, a formidable woman in her 50s whose social influence extended throughout the county and into London society itself, approached Catherine and Edmund with the warmth reserved for guests of particular distinction. Her greeting carried the subtle undertones of curiosity that Catherine had come to recognize whenever her childless state might become a topic of interest. "Lord and Lady Pemberton, how delightful to see you both this evening," Lady Ashworth said, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Catherine's appearance with the practiced assessment of a woman accustomed to reading social signals. "Catherine, my dear, you appear positively glowing this evening. The country air has clearly agreed with you during these autumn months." The comment about her appearance sent a jolt of nervous energy through Catherine's system, as she recognized the opening that had been provided for her intended announcement. The traditional language of aristocratic social interaction often relied upon subtle cues and indirect communication, and Lady Ashworth's observation about her appearance could easily be interpreted as an invitation to share news of a more personal nature. "You are too kind, Lady Ashworth," Catherine replied, her voice carefully modulated to suggest barely contained excitement. "I must confess that recent developments in my personal circumstances have indeed contributed to a sense of anticipation regarding the future." Edmund's attention was immediately captured by his wife's words, and the slight confusion in his expression was quickly masked by the social training that prevented public displays of uncertainty or surprise. The other guests within hearing distance began to lean closer, their curiosity piqued by the suggestion of significant news from one of the county's most prominent families. Lady Ashworth's eyes sparkled with the delight of someone who sensed the approach of particularly interesting gossip. "My dear Catherine, you speak with such mysterious enthusiasm. Surely you cannot leave us in suspense when you have clearly hinted at news of considerable importance." The moment had arrived, and Catherine felt as though she stood at the edge of a precipice from which there could be no return. The assembled guests, including several families whose opinions carried considerable weight in county society, waited with barely concealed anticipation. Edmund's protective presence beside her provided both comfort and additional pressure, as she realized that her deception would affect not only her own reputation but his as well. "Well," Catherine said, her voice carrying just the right note of shy excitement mixed with aristocratic reserve, "Edmund and I have been blessed with the most wonderful news. We are expecting our first child, and the physician has indicated that the birth should occur in late spring. The announcement created an immediate sensation throughout the immediate vicinity, with guests expressing delight, surprise, and congratulations in the enthusiastic manner appropriate to such momentous news. Lady Ashworth clapped her hands together with genuine pleasure, her social instincts recognizing the significance of being the first to hear such an important announcement from one of the county's premier families. Edmund's reaction was a masterpiece of controlled surprise and growing delight, his aristocratic training enabling him to respond appropriately despite his obvious confusion about news he was hearing for the first time. His arm tightened slightly around Catherine's waist in a gesture of protective support that appeared entirely natural to the observing guests. "This is indeed wonderful news," Edmund said, his voice carrying just the right tone of proud excitement mixed with protective concern. "Catherine has been consulting with the finest physicians, and we are both optimistic about welcoming our heir in the spring." The news spread through the ballroom with the rapid efficiency characteristic of aristocratic gatherings, where information of social significance traveled faster than the most urgent correspondence. Within minutes, Catherine found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each offering congratulations, advice, and personal anecdotes about their own experiences with childbirth and child-rearing. Lady Margaret Thornbury, a contemporary of Catherine's whose own fertility had been a source of considerable social status, approached with particular enthusiasm. "Catherine, my dearest friend, this is absolutely marvelous news. You must tell me everything. Are you experiencing the usual discomforts? Have you begun to consider nursery arrangements? The selection of a suitable wet nurse requires considerable planning, as I learned with my own children." Each question and comment added another layer to the web of deception that Catherine had created, requiring increasingly specific responses and commitments to maintaining the illusion she had constructed. Eleanor, observing from a respectful distance, could see the growing complexity of the situation and the mounting pressure on her mistress to provide convincing details about a pregnancy that existed only in the realm of fiction. As the evening progressed and the initial excitement of the announcement settled into more detailed conversations about practical arrangements, Catherine began to realize the full magnitude of what she had undertaken. The expectation of regular updates, medical consultations, visible physical changes, and ultimately the production of an actual child created a timeline of deception that would require careful management and increasing creativity to maintain. The music resumed, and Edmund led Catherine onto the dance floor for a waltz that would serve as a public celebration of their happy news. As they moved through the familiar steps with the grace expected of their station, Catherine caught glimpses of the various guests who were undoubtedly already composing letters to friends and relatives, spreading news of the Pemberton heir throughout the interconnected network of aristocratic society. "Catherine," Edmund murmured as they danced, his voice low enough to ensure privacy amid the surrounding music and conversation, "I confess myself somewhat surprised by your announcement this evening. Perhaps we might discuss the details of your recent medical consultations when we return to Thornfield?" The question carried undertones that suggested Edmund's growing awareness that something about the evening's events did not align with his own knowledge of their intimate relationship. Catherine's response would need to be carefully crafted to maintain the illusion while managing her husband's natural curiosity about developments that would significantly impact their shared future. The dance continued, but beneath the elegant surface of aristocratic celebration, the foundations had been laid for a deception that would test every aspect of Catherine's resourcefulness and determination in the challenging months ahead. The weeks following Lady Ashworth's ball transformed life at Thornfield Manor into an intricate ballet of deception and careful performance. Catherine had committed herself to a path that required constant vigilance and increasingly sophisticated lies to maintain the illusion of her pregnancy before the watchful eyes of family, staff, and the broader county society that had embraced the news with such enthusiasm. The morning routine in the Pemberton household had been subtly altered to accommodate Catherine's supposed condition. Eleanor had become an invaluable conspirator, helping to create the illusion of morning sickness through carefully timed absences from breakfast and the strategic disposal of untouched meals that were later attributed to the delicate stomach that often accompanied early pregnancy. Dr. Harrison Blackwood, the family physician whose discretion and expertise had served the Pemberton family for over 2 decades, had been summoned from London for a consultation that Catherine had privately dreaded. The elderly gentleman's medical knowledge and long association with the family created risks that required careful navigation, yet his involvement was essential for maintaining credibility among the local society that would expect regular medical supervision of such an important pregnancy. "Lady Pemberton," Dr. Blackwood said as he settled into the leather chair in Edmund's study, his medical bag placed carefully beside him and his silver spectacles reflecting the light from the tall windows. "Lord Pemberton has expressed his desire for the most careful monitoring of your condition, given the significance of this pregnancy for the family lineage. I trust you have been experiencing the typical symptoms associated with your current stage?" Catherine had spent considerable time preparing for this conversation, researching the experiences of other women and consulting medical texts that Eleanor had discreetly obtained from the manor's extensive library. Her performance required a delicate balance between convincing symptoms and the maintenance of her normal social obligations and physical appearance. "Indeed, Dr. Blackwood," Catherine replied, her hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen in a gesture she had practiced to appear natural and instinctive. "The morning difficulties have been quite pronounced, though I am told this is a positive indication of the pregnancy's healthy progression. I have also experienced unusual fatigue and certain sensitivities that were previously unknown to me." The physician nodded approvingly, making notes in the leather journal he maintained for documenting the medical histories of his most prominent patients. His questions continued with the thoroughness expected of a man whose reputation depended upon the successful care of aristocratic families, each inquiry requiring Catherine to provide responses that would satisfy medical scrutiny while maintaining the elaborate fiction she had constructed. Edmund, present for the consultation as was appropriate for a concerned husband, listened with the attention of a man whose entire future was bound up in the successful outcome of his wife's pregnancy. His questions reflected both genuine concern for Catherine's well-being and the practical considerations of preparing for an heir who would eventually inherit the responsibilities and privileges of the Pemberton legacy. "Dr. Blackwood," Edmund said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to having his concerns addressed with complete thoroughness, "I am particularly interested in your assessment of Catherine's general health and any precautions we should observe to ensure the most favorable outcome. The family has waited so long for this blessing that we cannot afford to overlook any detail that might contribute to a successful birth." The physician's response included recommendations for diet, exercise, social activities, and various other aspects of Catherine's daily routine that would need to be modified to support her supposed condition. Each suggestion added another layer to the web of deception, requiring Catherine to maintain consistent behavior patterns that would convince not only her husband but also the household staff who observed her daily activities with the increased attention that naturally accompanied such momentous news. As autumn progressed into winter, the social calendar continued to provide numerous opportunities for Catherine to display her pregnancy to the county society that followed such developments with keen interest. The Christmas season brought a series of social obligations that required careful planning to maintain the illusion while managing the increasing complexity of the deception. Lady Margaret Thornbury's winter salon provided a particular challenge, as the intimate gathering of ladies allowed for detailed discussions about pregnancy symptoms, childbirth experiences, and the various preparations required for welcoming a new addition to an aristocratic family. Catherine found herself the center of attention among women whose own experiences provided them with detailed knowledge against which her performance would be measured. "Catherine, my dear," Lady Margaret said as the ladies gathered around the fireplace in her elegant drawing room, their afternoon tea accompanied by the kind of frank conversation that such intimate gatherings permitted, "you must tell us about your preparations for the nursery. Have you begun to consider the arrangements for your confinement? The selection of a monthly nurse requires considerable planning, particularly for a family of your standing." The conversation demanded increasingly specific knowledge about practical arrangements that Catherine had never needed to consider in detail. Eleanor had provided extensive research and preparation, but the spontaneous nature of social conversation created constant risks of exposure through inconsistent or implausible responses. "We have indeed begun the initial preparations," Catherine replied, drawing upon the extensive conversations she had shared with Eleanor about the typical arrangements made by aristocratic families. "Edmund has consulted with his cousin Lord Pemberton about the monthly nurse who attended his wife during their children's births. The recommendation comes with the highest praise for both medical expertise and discretion." Meanwhile, at Thornfield Manor, the household staff had begun making the physical preparations that such momentous news required. The nursery wing, which had remained closed and unused during the early years of Catherine and Edmund's marriage, was opened and carefully cleaned under Eleanor's supervision. The selection of appropriate furnishings, the hiring of additional staff, and the thousand small details that accompanied preparation for an aristocratic birth created a mounting pressure of expectation that made Catherine's deception increasingly difficult to maintain. The winter months also brought challenges related to Catherine's physical appearance, as the progression of pregnancy would normally begin to create visible changes that the sharp eyes of aristocratic society would expect to observe. Eleanor proved invaluable in creating subtle modifications to Catherine's wardrobe and the strategic use of accessories and posture that could suggest the beginning stages of physical changes without requiring actual pregnancy. Edmund's growing excitement and involvement created perhaps the most difficult aspect of maintaining the deception. His natural desire to be protective and supportive of his wife's condition led to increased attention and intimacy that required Catherine to perform her role continuously, even in the privacy of their own chambers. The emotional complexity of deceiving someone she genuinely cared for added a layer of guilt and anxiety to the practical challenges of maintaining the illusion. "Catherine," Edmund said one evening as they sat together in the library, the fire casting warm shadows across the room while snow fell gently outside the tall windows, "I find myself thinking constantly about our child and the future we are creating together. The responsibility of raising an heir to the Pemberton legacy feels both exciting and daunting, particularly given the uncertain times in which we live." These intimate conversations required Catherine to engage with the emotional reality of their supposed shared future while knowing that the foundation of their discussions was built upon an elaborate lie. The genuine happiness and hope in Edmund's voice created a profound internal conflict between her desire to provide him with the joy he deserved and her terror of the inevitable discovery that would destroy not only his happiness but potentially their entire marriage. As winter deepened and spring approached, the timeline Catherine had established for the birth of their child began to create mounting pressure. The expectation of visible pregnancy progression, regular medical consultations, and eventual preparation for confinement meant that her window for finding a resolution to the deception was rapidly narrowing. The social calendar continued to provide both opportunities and risks, with each gathering requiring Catherine to maintain her performance while managing the increasing complexity of questions and expectations from friends and family who were genuinely invested in the success of her pregnancy. The weight of their sincere care and excitement added emotional complications to what had begun as a desperate attempt to meet social expectations. Eleanor's loyalty and assistance had been essential to maintaining the deception thus far, but even her resourcefulness was being tested by the mounting challenges of creating convincing physical evidence of pregnancy progression while maintaining Catherine's ability to fulfill her social obligations and marital responsibilities. The approaching spring season would bring new challenges and ultimately force Catherine to confront the reality that her elaborate deception could not continue indefinitely. The expectations she had created would soon require either the miraculous production of an actual child or the devastating confession of a lie that had grown far beyond her ability to control or contain. Spring arrived at Thornfield Manor with an explosion of color and renewal that stood in stark contrast to the mounting anxiety that consumed Catherine's every waking moment. The gardens that had been dormant throughout the winter months now displayed the careful planning and expert cultivation that had made them renowned throughout the county. Yet Catherine found herself unable to appreciate their beauty as the timeline of her deception approached its inevitable crisis point. Dr. Blackwood's monthly visits had become increasingly challenging to navigate, as the physician's medical expertise and growing familiarity with Catherine's supposed condition created mounting pressure for physical evidence that could not be provided through performance alone. The careful positioning, strategic clothing, and calculated responses that had sustained the illusion through the winter months were no longer sufficient to satisfy medical scrutiny. "Lady Pemberton," Dr. Blackwood said during his April consultation, his professional demeanor carrying subtle notes of concern that had not been present during earlier visits, "I must confess that I find certain aspects of your condition somewhat unusual. The progression of physical changes appears less pronounced than I would typically expect at this stage, and some of your symptoms seem inconsistent with my previous observations." Catherine felt her heart racing as she struggled to maintain her composure under the physician's increasingly penetrating gaze. Eleanor, present as always during these consultations, remained motionless, but Catherine could sense the tension radiating from her loyal companion as they both recognized the growing danger of discovery. "I have always been told that pregnancies can vary considerably in their presentation," Catherine replied, drawing upon the extensive research that had become her constant preoccupation throughout the winter months. "My mother often spoke of her own experiences, which apparently included similar variations in the typical progression that physicians might expect to observe." Edmund, whose excitement about impending fatherhood had grown throughout the winter, leaned forward with the protective concern that had characterized his behavior since the announcement at Lady Ashworth's ball. His genuine care for Catherine's well-being created an additional layer of emotional complexity to an already impossible situation. "Dr. Blackwood, should we be concerned about these variations?" Edmund asked, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to demanding clear answers about matters affecting his family. If there are any additional precautions or treatments that might ensure the best possible outcome, I insist that we explore every option regardless of expense or inconvenience. The physician's response included recommendations for additional examinations and consultations with specialists whose expertise might provide better insight into Catherine's unusual presentation. Each suggestion created new challenges for maintaining the deception while avoiding medical scrutiny that would inevitably expose the truth of her situation. Meanwhile, the social expectations surrounding Catherine's pregnancy had reached a crescendo of anticipation that made normal daily life increasingly difficult to manage. The approaching birth had become a topic of county-wide interest, with friends and neighbors offering assistance, advice, and constant inquiries about preparations that created mounting pressure for concrete evidence of the child that was supposedly approaching arrival. Lady Margaret Thornbury had taken a particularly active interest in Catherine's pregnancy, visiting Thornfield Manor weekly with offers of assistance and detailed discussions about the practical arrangements that would be required for the birth and subsequent care of the Pemberton heir. Her own extensive experience with childbirth made her an especially challenging audience for Catherine's increasingly desperate performance. "Catherine, my dear friend," Lady Margaret said during one of her afternoon visits, settling into the comfortable chair in the morning room while Eleanor served tea with the careful attention to detail that such important social occasions required. "I have been thinking constantly about your approaching confinement, and I believe the time has come for more serious discussions about the specific arrangements. Have you selected your monthly nurse? The decision cannot be delayed much longer if you wish to secure someone of appropriate quality and experience." The conversation demanded detailed responses about arrangements that Catherine had researched extensively but never actually implemented. Each question required increasingly elaborate explanations about consultations with nurses, preparations for the birth chamber, and the 1,000 practical details that accompanied the arrival of an aristocratic heir. "Edmund has been corresponding with his family about the nurse who attended his sister during her children's births," Catherine replied, hoping that the reference to family connections would satisfy Lady Margaret's curiosity while avoiding the need for specific details that could be verified independently. "The recommendation comes with the highest praise, and we expect to finalize the arrangements within the fortnight." As the conversations continued, Catherine became increasingly aware of the impossibility of her situation. The approaching timeline for birth meant that she would soon need to either produce an actual child or confess to a deception that had grown far beyond her original desperate impulse to silence social criticism about her childless state. Eleanor's resourcefulness had been pushed to its absolute limits in maintaining the physical illusion of pregnancy progression, but the approaching birth created challenges that could not be solved through clever positioning or strategic wardrobe choices. The expectation of confinement, medical attendance, and ultimately the presentation of a newborn child required solutions that lay beyond the realm of performance and deception. The emotional toll of maintaining the elaborate lie had begun to affect Catherine's health and well-being in ways that ironically made her appear more consistent with certain aspects of late pregnancy. The stress, anxiety, and constant vigilance required to maintain her performance had created genuine physical symptoms that provided some credibility to her supposed condition while adding to the mounting pressure she felt about the approaching crisis. Edmund's growing excitement and preparation for fatherhood created perhaps the most painful aspect of the situation. His genuine happiness, his careful planning for their child's future, and his tender consideration for Catherine's supposed needs made the deception feel like a betrayal that extended far beyond the social pressures that had originally motivated her desperate choice. "Catherine," Edmund said one evening as they walked together through the gardens, the spring air filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the promise of renewal that nature provided regardless of human concerns, "I find myself overwhelmed with gratitude for the blessing we are about to receive. The prospect of holding our child, of beginning the next chapter of our family's legacy, fills me with a joy I never imagined possible." These intimate moments of shared anticipation created a profound emotional conflict for Catherine, who recognized that her deception had not only failed to solve her original problem but had created far more serious consequences that would ultimately destroy the very relationship she had been trying to protect. The weight of Edmund's trust and love made the inevitable revelation feel like a betrayal that would permanently damage the foundation of their marriage. As spring progressed towards summer, the mounting pressure from medical consultations, social expectations, and Edmund's eager preparations created a situation that could no longer be sustained through performance and evasion. Catherine found herself facing the reality that she would soon need to confront the consequences of her desperate choice or find some miraculous solution that could resolve the impossible situation she had created. The approaching crisis would test not only Catherine's courage and resourcefulness but also the very foundations of the relationships and social structures that had driven her to such desperate measures in the first place. The elaborate deception that had begun as a temporary solution to social pressure had evolved into a web of lies that threatened to destroy everything she had been trying to protect. Eleanor remained her steadfast ally, but even her loyalty and ingenuity could not solve the fundamental problem of producing an actual child to satisfy the expectations that Catherine had created. The countdown to the supposed birth had begun, and with it, the final act of a drama that would require either miraculous intervention or devastating confession. The beautiful spring gardens of Thornfield Manor, bursting with life and renewal, provided an ironic backdrop for Catherine's growing realization that her elaborate deception had trapped her in a situation from which there might be no escape that would preserve her marriage, her reputation, or her future happiness. The late spring sunshine that bathed Thornfield Manor in golden light on the morning of May 15 seemed to mock Catherine's mounting desperation as she faced the reality that her elaborate deception had reached its inevitable breaking point. According to the timeline she had established at Lady Ashworth's ball, this was to be the week of her confinement. Yet no amount of performance or strategic positioning could produce the child that society, her husband, and her physician now expected to arrive at any moment. Dr. Blackwood had arrived the previous evening and taken up residence in the guest quarters, his presence serving as a constant reminder of the medical scrutiny that would soon expose the truth of Catherine's situation. The physician's growing concerns about the unusual aspects of her pregnancy had led him to recommend the attendance of a London specialist, Dr. Reginald Pembroke, whose reputation for managing difficult births among the aristocracy made his involvement both prestigious and terrifying for Catherine's purposes. Lady Pemberton, Dr. Blackwood said as he conducted what he believed would be his final examination before the onset of labor, I must express my continued concern about certain inconsistencies in your presentation. Dr. Pembroke will arrive this afternoon, and I believe his expertise may provide valuable insights into the peculiarities we have observed throughout your pregnancy. Catherine's hands trembled as she submitted to the examination, knowing that each additional moment of medical scrutiny brought her closer to inevitable discovery. Eleanor remained nearby, her own anxiety carefully concealed beneath the professional demeanor that had served them both throughout the long months of deception, yet both women recognized that their situation had become untenable. Edmund's excited preparation for fatherhood had reached fever pitch, with the nursery fully prepared, wet nurses interviewed and selected, and birth announcements drafted for distribution to family and friends throughout England. His genuine joy and anticipation created an emotional burden for Catherine that had become almost unbearable, particularly as she contemplated the devastating impact that the revelation of her deception would have on their relationship. The household staff moved through their duties with the heightened attention and careful preparation that such momentous occasions required. Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper whose 20 years of service to the Pemberton family had made her privy to the most intimate details of aristocratic life, supervised the final preparations for the birth chamber with an efficiency that reflected her experience with similar situations among other noble families. Everything has been prepared according to the finest standards, my lady, Mrs. Henderson reported to Catherine during the morning briefing that had become routine during the final weeks of the supposed pregnancy. The birth chamber has been thoroughly cleaned and arranged, the supplies recommended by Dr. Blackwood have been obtained, and the additional staff members are prepared to assist with whatever requirements may arise. Each detail of these preparations added another layer to Catherine's growing sense of entrapment, as the expectation of imminent birth created a situation that could no longer be postponed or evaded through the performance techniques that had sustained her deception throughout the winter and spring months. The arrival of Dr. Pembroke in the early afternoon brought with it a level of medical expertise that Catherine knew would instantly expose the truth of her situation. The renowned physician's reputation had been built upon his ability to manage the most challenging obstetrical cases among England's most prominent families, and his examination would certainly reveal the absence of any pregnancy-related physical changes. Lord Pemberton, Dr. Pembroke said as he was received in the library for the consultation that would precede his examination of Catherine, Dr. Blackwood has briefed me on the unusual aspects of your wife's pregnancy. While variations in presentation are not uncommon, the combination of factors he has described suggests the need for particularly careful evaluation. Edmund's response reflected his genuine concern for Catherine's well-being combined with his determination to ensure the best possible medical care for both his wife and their expected child. The irony of his protective instincts working against Catherine's desperate need to avoid medical scrutiny was not lost on her as she prepared for the examination that would end her months of deception. "Dr. Pembroke, I place complete confidence in your expertise," Edmund replied, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to commanding the best available resources. "Catherine's health and the successful delivery of our child are my primary concerns, and I insist that no expense or effort be spared to ensure the most favorable outcome." As the time for Dr. Pembroke's examination approached, Catherine found herself confronting the reality that her elaborate deception was about to be exposed in the most humiliating and devastating manner possible. The months of careful performance, strategic positioning, and elaborate lies would be revealed as a fraud that had deceived not only society but her own husband, whose trust and love she had exploited in service of her desperate attempt to meet social expectations. Eleanor made one final attempt to provide her mistress with an escape from the approaching crisis. "My lady," she said quietly as they prepared for the examination, "perhaps the time has come to consider a different approach to this situation. The consequences of discovery through medical examination may be far more severe than those that might result from a carefully prepared confession." But Catherine's ability to think rationally about her situation had been compromised by months of stress, anxiety, and the mounting pressure of maintaining an increasingly impossible deception. The prospect of confessing to Edmund and facing the social and legal consequences of her elaborate fraud seemed even more terrifying than the medical examination that would inevitably expose her lies. "I cannot face the destruction of everything I have worked to build," Catherine replied, her voice reflecting the desperation that had driven her throughout the long months of deception. "Perhaps some miracle might yet provide a solution that could preserve what we have created together." Dr. Pembroke's examination was conducted with the thoroughness and professionalism that had made him the most sought-after specialist in London, yet his findings confirmed what Catherine had known would be inevitable from the moment she first conceived her desperate plan. The complete absence of any physical evidence of pregnancy, combined with the inconsistencies that Dr. Blackwood had observed throughout the supposed gestation period, led to a conclusion that would shatter the elaborate illusion that had consumed Catherine's life for the past 8 months. "Lord Pemberton," Dr. Pembroke said as he emerged from the examination chamber, his expression reflecting the gravity of his findings, "I must request a private consultation with you regarding my examination of Lady Pemberton. The situation requires immediate discussion of certain medical realities that will significantly impact your family's circumstances." Edmund's confusion quickly transformed into growing alarm as he recognized the serious implications of the physician's carefully chosen words. The privacy requested for their consultation suggested findings that were far more serious than the routine complications that might be expected during childbirth, creating an atmosphere of crisis that would soon engulf the entire household. The conversation between Edmund and Dr. Pembroke took place behind closed doors, yet the outcome was inevitable given the complete absence of any evidence supporting Catherine's claims of pregnancy. The revelation that his wife had deceived him, the medical profession, and society itself about such a fundamental matter would challenge every aspect of Edmund's understanding of their relationship and his trust in her character. Catherine waited in her chambers with Eleanor, both women recognizing that the approaching confrontation would determine not only the immediate future of her marriage but potentially her entire social and legal standing within the community that had celebrated her supposed pregnancy with such enthusiasm. The afternoon sun continued to shine through the windows of Thornfield Manor, illuminating a scene of domestic tranquility that masked the approaching storm of revelation and consequence that would forever alter the lives of everyone who had been touched by Catherine's desperate deception. The confrontation between Catherine and Edmund took place in the privacy of the library, where the leather-bound volumes that chronicled centuries of Pemberton family history served as silent witnesses to a conversation that would determine the future of their marriage and their place in the society that had defined their entire existence. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, creating an atmosphere of solemnity that matched the gravity of the revelations that had shattered the carefully constructed illusion Catherine had maintained for 8 months. Edmund stood with his back to the tall windows, his silhouette outlined against the fading light as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of his wife's deception. Dr. Pembroke's clinical explanation of his findings had left no room for doubt or alternative interpretation. Catherine had never been pregnant, and the elaborate performance that had convinced family, friends, and society had been nothing more than a sophisticated fraud designed to meet expectations that she felt unable to fulfill through genuine means. "Catherine," Edmund said, his voice carrying a weight of disappointment and bewilderment that was far more devastating than anger might have been, "Dr. Pembroke has explained his findings, yet I find myself struggling to understand how such an elaborate deception could have been maintained for so many months. The implications of what you have done extend far beyond our personal relationship to encompass our standing in society, our relationships with family and friends, and the very foundation of trust upon which marriage itself must be built. Catherine had spent the hours since Dr. Pembroke's examination preparing for this moment, yet the reality of facing Edmund's profound disappointment proved far more difficult than she had anticipated. The genuine pain in his voice, the confusion in his expression, and the collapse of the joy that had sustained him throughout the supposed pregnancy created a scene of emotional devastation that no amount of preparation could have made bearable. "Edmund," Catherine began, her voice trembling with the weight of confession and the desperate hope that some explanation might mitigate the damage her deception had caused, "I recognize that no words can adequately excuse the choice I made or the elaborate lies that followed. Yet I hope you might understand that my actions were born not of malice or calculation, but of desperation created by pressures that I felt incapable of addressing through honest means." Eleanor, who had remained loyally at Catherine's side throughout the months of deception, now found herself serving as witness to the conversation that would determine her mistress's future. Her own complicity in the elaborate fraud created moral complexities that extended beyond her role as lady-in-waiting to encompass questions of loyalty, duty, and the boundaries of service that aristocratic relationships traditionally encompassed. Edmund moved closer to the fireplace, where the family portraits that adorned the mantelpiece reminded him of the heritage and responsibility that made the absence of an heir such a pressing concern for the Pemberton legacy. The irony that Catherine's desperate attempt to address these pressures had ultimately made their situation far more complicated was not lost on either of them as they contemplated the social and legal consequences of her revealed deception. "The expectations placed upon us by society and family," Edmund said slowly, his legal training enabling him to analyze the situation with careful precision despite his emotional turmoil, "create pressures that I recognize as real and significant. Yet the solution you chose has created far more serious problems than those it was intended to address. The announcement of your pregnancy created expectations among dozens of families throughout the county, preparations that involved considerable expense and effort, and commitments that cannot simply be withdrawn without serious consequences for our reputation and social standing." The conversation continued as afternoon transitioned into evening, with both Catherine and Edmund attempting to understand how their marriage had reached such a crisis point and what options might exist for addressing the immediate practical challenges created by her deception. The social and legal implications of announcing a false pregnancy, deceiving medical professionals, and misleading friends and family about such a fundamental matter created complications that extended far beyond personal embarrassment to encompass potential civil and criminal consequences. Lady Margaret Thornbury's unexpected arrival at Thornfield Manor during the early evening added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Her weekly visits to check on Catherine's progress had made her one of the most invested observers of the supposed pregnancy, and her genuine concern for Catherine's well-being had led her to call personally when news of Dr. Pembroke's consultation had reached her through the interconnected network of county society. "Edmund, Catherine," Lady Margaret said as she was received in the drawing room, her expression reflecting the concern that had motivated her impromptu visit, "I heard about Dr. Pembroke's consultation and wanted to offer whatever assistance might be helpful during what must be a challenging time. Is there anything specific that our family might do to support you through the complications that have apparently arisen?" The conversation with Lady Margaret required Edmund and Catherine to navigate the immediate challenge of managing external perceptions while avoiding additional deception that would only compound their existing problems. The need to provide some explanation for the medical consultation without revealing the full truth of Catherine's fraud created diplomatic challenges that tested their ability to present a united front despite the crisis in their personal relationship. "Lady Margaret," Edmund replied with the careful diplomacy that his aristocratic training had provided, "Catherine's condition has proven more complex than initially anticipated, and Dr. Pembroke's specialized expertise was required to address certain medical concerns. We are grateful for your friendship and support during this uncertain time." As the evening progressed and their various social obligations required attention, Catherine and Edmund were forced to continue their performance for the benefit of household staff, visiting friends, and the broader community that remained unaware of the crisis that had engulfed their marriage. The irony that they were now united in a different form of deception, concealing the truth of Catherine's fraud rather than maintaining the illusion of her pregnancy, created a strange intimacy born of shared necessity rather than mutual trust. Dr. Blackwood's departure from Thornfield Manor required careful management to avoid creating suspicions about the sudden change in Catherine's medical situation. His professional discretion and long association with the family provided some protection against immediate exposure, yet the need to explain the absence of the birth that the entire county had been anticipating created ongoing challenges that would require creative solutions. The resolution of Catherine's deception ultimately came through a combination of Edmund's legal expertise, Dr. Blackwood's medical discretion, and careful coordination with the small circle of family and friends whose knowledge and support would be essential for managing the social consequences of the situation. The announcement of a miscarriage provided a medically plausible explanation for the absence of the expected child while allowing Catherine and Edmund to maintain their social standing and avoid the more devastating consequences that complete exposure of the fraud might have created. Eleanor's loyalty throughout the crisis earned her not only continued employment but also a position of increased trust and responsibility within the household. Her discretion and competence during the most challenging period of Catherine's life had demonstrated qualities that made her invaluable for managing the ongoing social and practical challenges that would accompany their recovery from the deception. The months following the resolution of the immediate crisis provided Catherine and Edmund with opportunities to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of greater honesty and mutual understanding. The shared experience of navigating through the consequences of her deception had created new forms of intimacy and trust, even as it had challenged fundamental assumptions about marriage, duty, and the pressures created by social expectations. Catherine's experience had taught her valuable lessons about the dangers of allowing external pressures to override personal integrity, while Edmund's response to the crisis had demonstrated his capacity for forgiveness and his commitment to their marriage despite the challenges it had faced. The absence of children remained a source of disappointment for both of them, yet their enhanced understanding of each other's needs and fears created possibilities for addressing this challenge through more honest and collaborative approaches. The spring gardens of Thornfield Manor, which had witnessed the most difficult period of Catherine's deception, now provided a setting for quiet conversations and renewed courtship as Catherine and Edmund worked to rebuild their relationship with greater authenticity and mutual respect. The flowers that bloomed with natural beauty served as reminders of the genuine blessings that could emerge from honesty and trust, in contrast to the artificial constructions that had created such devastating complications. As summer approached and life at Thornfield Manor settled into new routines based on truth rather than performance, Catherine found herself grateful for the painful lessons that her experience had provided. The social pressures that had driven her to such desperate measures remained real and significant, yet her enhanced understanding of their true cost had equipped her with better tools for addressing them through honest communication and mutual support rather than elaborate deception. The story of Catherine's deception and its resolution served as a testament to the possibility of redemption through honesty, the power of forgiveness in preserving relationships that matter, and the ultimate futility of attempting to meet social expectations through means that compromise personal integrity. The Pemberton family's experience had tested the foundations of aristocratic marriage, social duty, and individual conscience, ultimately demonstrating that authentic happiness could only be built upon a foundation of truth and mutual respect.